Hello and welcome to Autistic Radio on a Sunday, 5:55. Thank you to our sponsor, coldpack.co.uk. If you're an osteopath, a physiotherapist, a chiropractor, and you require the best cryotherapy gel pack that also has your details, your website, your logo printed on it to remind your patients of you and increase your referrals, then they are sponsoring this program and we benefit when you buy from them. If you're an end user who needs a cold pack to replace that one that's in the sports first aid kit, coldpack.co.uk, every penny you spend on that website goes directly to Autistic Radio and Autistic Association. Thank you for your sponsorship. Harry, it's 5:55. Take us away into the programme.
Hello all, this is Harry's Facebook for Sunday the 26th of October 2025, and this is where we share and discuss the Facebook posts that have been shared to us on the Autistic Radio page. And the first post is from Aurora Consulting, who is a business consultant. Aurora is an autistic-owned business offering organisations bespoke training and consulting. And what they've shared is the following. Good morning to everyone, but especially those who forgot the clocks went back last night. And an extra enthusiastic good morning to all who are going to be confused by your car clock since you didn't change it since months ago. And now it's telling the right time. That'll be me. Post is referring to the change of the clock that goes back an hour this weekend in October, which is the end of British summertime. And it always confuses people, no matter whether it changes in the summer or reverts back in the winter. Or is it forward the right time or is back the other time? I mean, I confuse myself with other people's thoughts.
Well, I know that I was out in the woodlands yesterday, and the maple tree that I planted when I was in my 20s and now my wife can hardly reach around to hug because it's grown so big, has left a beautiful, beautiful carpet of multicoloured leaves that I just stood at and just looked down, and it just took my breath away and brought a joyful tear to my eye. So if the clocks going back mean that we have these autumn transitions, I say hurrah.
My confusion this time was I forgot that it was Saturday into Sunday that it changed. I thought it was going to be Sunday into Monday. I don't know where I got that from. But being a guy who's never been fond of getting out of bed early, it really is a struggle to get enough daylight now, because you really have to get up with the sun in order to get a maximum amount of daylight for the next how many months is it before we go? 6 months, yeah, well, no, it's actually like December the 21st, isn't it, when we'll regain a bit more daylight. Time, it's such a confusing thing.
I always get very confused with it. I almost made the same mistake of thinking it was tomorrow the clock's changed. And I also get confused because I'm involved in a lot of groups in other parts of the world where they change their clocks on a different day or they don't change their clocks at all. And it's always a difficult time for me as well, for the fact that it's coming into winter and I'm going to be shut in the flat a lot more because the weather's going to mean I'm not going to be able to get out.
I can remember being at primary school in the late 1960s, so about 1969, maybe I'm about 6 or 7 years old, and they did something with European time back then, which meant that it was extremely dark when you went to school, and it was still dark when classes began at 9 a.m. I don't know if anybody else can remember that.
In the text, GR saying it takes time for me to adjust. Just like there's some static in the air interfering with my ability to feel where I am. For the purpose of the topic, what British summertime is and what the post is referring to. What the post is referring to is the British summertime, which refers to the practice in the United Kingdom of advancing clocks 1 hour forward of Greenwich Mean Time during the summer months. This changes results in more daylight in the evenings and less in the mornings, effectively shifting the time zone from an hour. It typically begins on the last Sunday in March and ends on the last Sunday in October, which has just happened.
I think it makes a lot of sense to be confused. We have it here too. It just happens next weekend, going in the same direction. I think the best way to remember it is to think about Jules' maple tree and imagine falling back into the leaves, because you fall back at this time of the year. But I think the reason we might feel strange, or some of us, is I'll use my dog as an example. Dogs tend to go by the light, the sun in the sky, the way we probably did a long time ago. And then they get used to all of our routines day by day, because the sun isn't exactly in the same spot in the sky. And they really notice the time changes. Like, they're like, why are all the milestones of my day happening an hour off? They eventually get used to it.
Good point, Teresa. I was beginning to question what you were saying there by thinking nothing has really changed. But yeah, for the dog, who's used to a routine happening at a certain time, the change in the human is a change for the dog or the animal. And so, yeah, the change does exist. But actually, nothing has really changed except, a time mechanism.
It just shows you how important time is. I mean, what you're referring to, Ray, back in the 60s, my dad actually mentioned that a few times, because me being my autistic self, or just probably just being nosy, asked why they change the clocks, because even though they do it in the most, or they're supposed to be doing it in the most convenient time of the week, which is a Sunday morning at 2 o'clock in the morning and reverting it to 1 in the morning. That's, if they did it in the weekday, it'd be a lot worse. I used to kind of wonder, what's going on here? Why did they do it? And my dad always reverts back to that time when he was in school. I think that's what you're referring to, Ray, is when they experimented in not doing it. And what actually happened was that up north in Scotland, it caused mayhem, because it takes longer to get lighter up there. And in the morning, it was causing chaos for the likes of schools, etc. And I think he even said, even locally, the west of Scotland kind of get down to the central belt, near Glasgow, to be, just to locate where we are, is even then it was really concerning about school children basically walking to school in the dark. So they did try experiment not doing it, and it didn't work out. So that's why it remains why it is this now. But the time thing itself, especially when you're so not obsessed with time, but in myself, I'm just so, we're all sort of connected to time, the clock. And it's always an interesting concept when you go deeper. It's like a god, really. you don't worship it, you just do as you're told. And it's just, no matter if it's in the summer or going into the winter, it always seems to cause confusion to someone. But when people do talk about the inconvenience or confusion, it's not usually that much of a big deal because of the day of the week that happens. It's just like they turn up to church early. I suppose if you turn up an hour early, that is a major inconvenience, but it's better than it would be like missing an appointment, etc., or going to work.
Didn't they originally do it for the farmers? And I think it made a good difference in the spring, and then they put it back because it was causing a worse problem in the fall.
Yeah, I was told that that's why they originally did it in the first place, was for farming.
When I was a builder about 1988, we were on just basically a field, and some people turned up and they interviewed us all about changing the clocks and whether it should continue to happen. I can't remember who they were from. And my boss just turned around and said, we start at 7:30 and we finish at 4:30. And funnily enough, on that job, I remember, because obviously there's no electric. And late on in the day, we would actually drive our vans onto the site and shine the lights onto the job so we could see what we were doing.
There is one example of the time making a difference, and it's quite comical, maybe not, is in Scotland, you can't buy alcohol until 12 o'clock, or at least I think that's still the case now, but at the time it was 12 o'clock. And I think someone went to the shop an hour early because of the time change, and it caused a bit of furore. Some years ago. I don't think it caused a furore in terms of, anything major, but it was just a major inconvenience. It's not something I would do, is always go to the shop that early, but it just shows you how someone's actual routine was affected by that change, even just for one day.
I think here it happens in reverse. The bars are supposed to close at 2, so next weekend, when it reaches 2, they'll put their clocks back and stay open an extra hour.
Sounds like the world we live in. The next post is from Actually Autistic, which is a page educational consultant. Late diagnosed, passionate advocate for diagnosed and undiagnosed autistic children and young people. And I've shared a quote. Non-autistic people, please stop speaking for us, speaking over us, and acting like you know us better than we know ourselves. What's people's thoughts?
Just ableism, I hate it.
Who actually speaks for us, over us, acting like they know us? Professionals. And I suppose it's creeping into the everyday public now, yeah, because the media kind of is full of jargon and opinion and comment. But generally speaking, my experience has been that they don't relate at all.
In my experience, it was all the social workers of my extended family that were speaking over me, thinking they knew better than me.
I think professionals I think professionals is part of the problem, yes, but I think the people, in my experience, who talk over you to an extent and try and talk for you is generally family, especially if you're younger, especially if you're a child or even as a young, vulnerable adult. And it sometimes feels that assumptions are made and advice is given without it being sought. And many people feel that they're in that position. And some people feel if family, especially if they're strong, knitted family, with strong views of their own, but the views of their own it's not vicious, it's just overprotective, maybe, and has your best interests, or they think you have their best interests. I think that's what sometimes swarms a lot of autistic people from having their own voice and babelessly saying, no, I don't agree with what you're saying there. Especially when you're talking about somebody. If somebody says you can't do something, or you need to behave, or you behave in a way that's negative, but you feel that it's not negative, it's just who you are. It's like, it depends how the family is, but it's like people are judging you, and it's a lived experience, isn't it, really? It's like the assumptions are made. It's like, it's a big, bad, cruel world, as we all know, and I think some families can be overprotective. But on the other hand, there has been stories and experience from people that have said that there's been terms of bullying and intimidation as well from families, as well as professionals and people who are so-called experts. But a lot of the time, these so-called professionals and experts are actually invited by the family over your head. So, yeah, it's a mixture of both. It's a mixture of everything, really. Sometimes even friends.
I actually had the social workers impose a communications protocol and stop me being able to speak up for myself.
How did that work, Robbie?
It's limited how much contact I could have with the council or social workers because I spoke up for myself and made a complaint about their care plan.
So, in a sense, silencing you.
Because I often needed to send extra emails because I was put send before and I suddenly found I'd missed something out. And because I mentioned the S word, because I was really struggling, they used my disability to justify a communications protocol.
What's the S word you're referring to, Robbie?
Suicide.
Sounds like the wrong thing to do to cut communication off for you because of that word. You should have more communication.
Their idea to that kind of trauma is to impose drugs and some kind of compliance therapy for the mental health service. And what I needed was someone to find me a new home and someone to help me claim benefit because I was facing being chucked down the street. And the family took control of the move, and I was dealing with that as well. And no one was helping me.
And it sounds such a simple thing to ask. Safe space, safe environment, safe routine, which is well known even by the most ignorant that are aware of autism. The word suicide, though, always panics people. And I think there's kind of over protection or just over eagerness to resolve, or this shouldn't be, or this, let's sort this out, or just overtaken without actually listening to the person which has actually expressed that, or somebody's assumed that they've expressed that. I mean, I've been in that position myself, and the best thing I felt is just what I said, is about safe environment, safe routine, and basically something to look forward to. It's not as simple, really, but it's certainly a simple starting point. Of course, there's levels to that, but to be listened to is certainly the start of that, and to be respected for that.
I knew that at some point I'd be evicted, and I had no way of dealing with the complication of finding a new home, and I had no money, and they were teaching that as just faulty thinking.
Yeah, it sounds like it strikes fear in them. They are professionals in a bureaucracy. They're not thinking about you when they do things like that. They're thinking about themselves and what harm they might come to, as somebody, I believe, is saying in the comments. That's really problematic. And Harry's exactly right. And seeing you in your home and having your books unpacked and feeling into your routine, which is a very busy routine, is so good to see. I don't know how they can't have the common sense.
The thought of losing everything and ending up on the street was just too much to me. It was worse than just, it was, living like that was worse than being gone.
I sometimes try and see the other point of view from officialdom, like why they're being the way they are. And reading into this, it might be sometimes, and I may be totally wrong here, that they're trying to assist through restricting anything that may disadvantage a conversation or a process, because they're all about processes, people. There's no deviation from that. That's how it works. And in order to enable your case, it may be that they sometimes try and calm down certain sentiments or words. But that's just me looking for, a chink of light in a very dark area.
It's
In the
all about
text, in the text, you are saying, I had to rethink to support me. In the text, someone says, I had to rethink and to support me, but they were just there to make me pack my belongings so the council could move me out the house. A move that never should have happened. And he's saying it's a similar situation as yourself, Robbie. If they had moved me, I wouldn't be here now. Or they didn't. So the move didn't happen. So if they had moved me, I wouldn't be here now. There wouldn't have been a point in carrying on. So it's a similar situation yourself, Robbie. Or it's an understanding of the situation.
The council told me when my mother died, I had to be out the house in 4 weeks, and I'd lived here 51 years at the time, and I didn't want to move. And there were such things. Have you got pets? No, good, because where you're going, you can't have one. I won't go into the whole situation, but it took 58 months. I fought for 58 months to live in the home that I'd lived in all my life. So there is a happy ending, but it was I kept going through it because of the house. If I'd lost the house, I wouldn't have kept going.
I think
If,
there's a
if I,
thing. Sorry, I think there's a thing in Scottish law, perhaps, maybe it doesn't apply in England, that if you've been more than 6 months in the household of someone who passes away, you take over that tenancy. So, does it not happen with down in England?
I think the rules were then that you could only transfer the name once, and of course the tenancy had transferred from my father to my mother. But in the tenancy agreement, it says that you could nominate a person living in the house to stay there. And the council said to me, your mother never gave us any inclination that she wanted you to stay in the house when she died. And to which I said, so you're saying that after living in the same house with my mother for 50 years, when she died, she wanted me to be homeless. I mean, that's how bad it was.
I'd lived in my previous house for over 50 years. It was my parents' own house and it was being sold so the council could have the money for my mother's care. My extended family didn't care about me. All they wanted to do was empty out the house as quickly as possible. And they put the majority of my stuff and my parents' stuff in a skip. If I'd lost the rest, it wouldn't have been worth going on because my belongings and my parents' belongings is all I have left. I didn't want to stop in a house because I had nothing left there. But I wanted the connection to my past, the connections to people that cared about me, and the stuff I saved all my life to have something to do.
That's very important. The past, the identity. It's just. Now, I don't live with my parents, and my parents are still there. Parents are still alive, thankfully. I'm kind of in a privileged position, dare I say that, if that's the right way of putting it. But the identity, the belonging of being in that home, being in other homes with my parents and growing up, if there was a situation of they've got a bought house so it can be sold, and see if there was a certain way that things were done, that would certainly impact me. I've got a routine where I go there once a week, sometimes more. It's like a safe space to go to, have conversations and be in a sort of kind of safe environment where I don't feel judged. And it's not just that, it's that belonging thing. It's that belonging thing and that acceptance thing. And, there's always that kind of fear how things would progress, when we're no longer here. So listen to these stories, especially people that have lived with their parents up until they passed away. It's quite heartbreaking how some of these things lack understanding in the process. Because things do have to happen and processes need to be made, but the lack of understanding of autism, or just even the lack of understanding of people, especially if it's a son or a daughter of the parents that have passed away, it's sometimes it's like it just seems very uncaring and very kind of, I don't know, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, as you can imagine, like I say, 58 months of it, and there were various things. I mean, I was sent to look at a flat, and it's a podcast in itself. It was hell, 58 months. But at the end of it, when they said, well, you can stay, and it's like, why have you put me through this? Because my mental health, I mean, I got my autism diagnosis during this time. So that was a good thing that came out of it. But other than that, why it was just literally cruelty, mental cruelty.
I was going to ask that, GR, about your diagnosis, because I wasn't diagnosed when I went through a lot of the changeovers in my familial situation. But I think they just assume you're just going to cope like anybody, because I remember hearing that, you know, the most stressful things that can happen to a person are usually, you know, number one, a bereavement, and number two, loss of home, you know, or moving home, even just from an old home to a new home can be perhaps the most stressful thing that happens because of this uprootedness or whatever. But yeah, it was curious that you've mentioned now that you got your diagnosis through it, probably through the stress, you know, and other things. But I didn't know at the time that was why I was handling things in a certain way. But of course, I was kind of like acting neurotypical then, so it was like bite the bullet and just get through it. Luckily, I did.
Yeah, I mean, the council wanted to move me to this flat, which is 400 metres up the road, which would have been even worse just being on my old doorstep. But the council said to me, "Oh, we've got this flat lined up for you," and I said, "Well, can I go and look at it?" And they said, "Well, there's no point in doing that because you're going to move there whether you like it or not." So I claimed legal aid and I got a solicitor, which got them to back down, which meant that I actually got to go. Otherwise, I would have literally packed all the boxes up here, driven up the road, and the first time I would have seen where I was going to live would have been when I stepped through that door with all my gear. That was one thing. But I got a viewing, and the housing association said I had a total meltdown there, and the council and the housing association, because it wasn't a council place, they said you've got a couple of days to think about it, and then they contacted the council and said that I wasn't mentally fit enough to cope with moving, so they turned me down. So the council were lumbered with me then. It's a whole story in itself.
Jules?
Is Jules muted?
Yes, Jules, sorry, you try to speak? Because you're muted. Can't hear you, Jules. I see you unmuted there. No, that's fine, Gia. It's understandable. Jules is just coming in and out, so just give him a chance to come in and a chance to speak.
Yeah, controlling our own life stories, you know, if we only could, you know, but sometimes in retrospect, in a way, we have.
Jules?
I'm sorry, my sound failed then. In the text, after the explanation from Robbie, Ray says, "How upsetting." And Robbie says that he learnt that belonging was not a place. And Ray says, "That's an insight, Robbie, an insightful comment. Home is not a place, it is about belonging," says Robbie. Harry says, "That's very true. The reason why I have lived in the same place for over 20 years. What Robbie describes is that he effectively lost both his parents and his home all at the same time, and we've heard that he wasn't supported in those enormous things happening coincidentally." Ray says that these narratives sometimes make their own sense. I say that a few years ago, my entire house burnt down, including most of my belongings. And a few days ago, my wife brought out some photos that we had forensically retrieved from the enormous pile of ash, and they had been taken to a local photographer to restore from a few negatives. And these photos are of me and my wife and the first dog when we were in our 20s, just newly married. So there is something incredibly important, not just about places, but also about the belongings that go with those things, however trivial they may be. That burnt piece of negative from which I derive an enormous amount of pleasure now is important. And if we bring this back to the original post, an awful lot of autistic people are in situations where they're not being listened to, and what's important to them is being overridden by other people.
The next post is from Yale Clark, developmental psychologist, who has an education page, Anxiety and OCD in Children and Parents, special focus on autistics and ADHDers. And she shared the following. She shared an image, which is a screenshot from the public page of a mother who has an autistic child. The child, whose face has been cropped out of the photo, is holding a sign that reads, "Autism is a disability, not an identity trend." Next to that image is my own image of a woman holding a sign that reads, "Affirming autistic identity improves the life of disabled people." And I have included a screenshot of my comment on that mother's post. And this text is the following. Autism is a disability, and one way of developing self-esteem is to accept one's autistic identity. Autistic identity means that we know we belong to a community that has strengths as well as struggles. And that deserves human rights. That is all. Autistic identity does not mean whitewashing disability or promoting some delusional supremacy fantasy. It is categorically not trendy. Accepting one's autistic identity can be life-saving for people who would otherwise be misdiagnosed with personality disorders or behavioural disorders. Of course, autistic people might have a personality disorder, but that comes from deep wounds, whereas being autistic is simply the way we were made. The only way we are going to heal this terrible divide in our community, the only way we are going to heal this terrible divide in our community is to go beyond memes and catchphrases and actually understand each other. If you think that the autistic identity movement is just a trend, then you don't understand it. If I think that the profound autism movement is just a way to centre parents, then I don't understand it. Life with severe autism. Stop being part of the problem. Stop sharing simplistic, facile catchphrases. Let's dialogue. What's your thoughts on this?
The more I read of Yael's posts, the better I feel. To have that person out there thinking these things and clearly putting them down is really, really important. So thank you. Divisions. People will try to create divisions. Divisions because of the myth of scarcity. And working against that, as Yale is doing, is important. And they are right. It is about dialogue. It is about conversations. And if Yale can suggest in any way that we here at Autistic Radio can help in that, improve in that, be of service to Yale, we're here.
Yes, that's interesting. And I like the approach that the Yale's post has made. It's so much division out there. And division out there is not actually deliberate in a nasty way. It's trying to protect, like, for instance, a mother trying to protect their child. But what it does, or what it seems to be doing in many autistic people's eyes, is causing harm. I think, though, that autism is in different levels of being not just accepted, which is a horrible thing to say, but it's true, but being understood of what actually is. And the complications of that, because every single person who's autistic is different. And every person who is autistic has different strengths, they have different needs, they have different struggles, and they have different journeys in life. And that's always going to be the sort of barrier to overcome. I don't think there's any intention to harm, it's about protection, but sometimes overprotection may cause harm without being intentional.
So is this hinting that we're not allowed to own identity? And I know there's a comparison being drawn between the two images, and the concern about identity is maybe being exploited to a certain extent. But owning identity, I think, again, is part of that other subject narrative, you know, the way you're supposed to live your life, the story you live, and being an identity is quite important to people. It's part of that relationship. Don't know quite what I'm trying to say here, but it's just some thoughts on what we've just been reading.
I think there's this extra layer in here where the first image is a mother of a child. I assume that Yael knows more about the story behind this screenshot because she has such a thorough response and her response is correct. I can't help but wondering, does that mother mean autism is a disability and this idea about identity is not a trend? Maybe. Like, but we have to assume based on the reaction that she sees the identity aspect as a trend. That's the only thing I can say is, oh, what a disadvantage when a parent doesn't understand, but at least they understand more than they did I guess when we were children. I'm not sure. And then my other thought was the internet and social media. They just allow this sort of way of holding up a sign which is not well thought through. And I guess it's got a name. I forget what it is right now. Virtue signaling or something like that.
I think we can link this back to the previous post about who's speaking for us. And it would appear that there is an autism mum here. I think that's the phrase that has been coined. Autism mum. Somebody fiercely protecting their child from the outside world, and they are coming up against autistic people who later have latched onto the neurodiversity paradigm, and there appears to the autism mum looking after their child a conflict there, a conflict to say, stop going on about identity, take your identity politics and stick them, because my child is disabled, my child needs help, society needs to recognise the disability of my child, otherwise I won't get the services for my child that I need. That's really what I perceive as the difficulty that's being pointed to.
In the text, Robbie said, support needs are more complicated than more and less needs. It is about getting the right support, listening to people that know the autistic person best themselves, their family and their friends. Much of the problems is a diagnosis based solely on deficits and ignoring strengths. And politicians and media encourage division.
Do you think it's being suggested that the autistic identity or the neurodivergent identity shall not prevail?
It appears that way. And it was always going to be resisted by many. Because every autistic person's different, right? So if someone who's autistic, and especially if it's a parent that's like, emotionally involved, of course, it's like they're saying, stop simplifying it. I know I dare to say, stop making it sound like being autistic is wonderful. It's not, it's hell. And my child's going through hell. Stop downplaying it and start recognising for what they believe autism actually is, or being autistic actually is. But then there's a lack of understanding from that viewpoint due to their prejudice because of what they think they see in their own child.
I might be wrong, and our world listeners will put me right in the emails, but it does appear that in the United States, statesize, there is this already existing political disagreement between the neurodiversity movement and those who have gone before, particularly those who have gone before supporting the behavioural science interventions to fix their kids. So it does appear that the politics is something that is being pointed to here. And I think the poster is trying to say, let's talk about it. Let's have a real open conversation and see what we can do here. And that's what I want to take from here. I want to take the positiveness of this person saying there's a solution out there, and it's dialogue.
Yeah, I agree. It's that thing we often talk about, that two things can be true at the same time. But some cultures are fast. They just, you know, fast. They want one thing to win or one idea to. It's I forget. There's a word. Anyway, one of my best friends from my childhood moved to the United States, and so I only told a few people after my diagnosis, and she has lived more than half of her life outside of Canada, and she thought about it for a long time, and then she said, "As long as you don't use it as an excuse." I haven't, I haven't spoken about it again with her.
The next post is from Haley Moss, who's a public figure, an attorney, advocate, thought leader, author, and speaker. And she shared the following. A few years ago, I wrote for StarTrek.com in honour of Autism Acceptance Month about how the show was a lens for so many actually autistic people to view the world, especially through Mr. Spock, who was portrayed by Leonard Nimoy. You can only imagine the delight and shock when I heard from David Knight and Julie Nimoy of the Nimoy Knight Foundation. They read my article, which was absolutely mind-blowing to me and humbled me with the lifelong and prosper pendant at the LLAPA Award in Leonard's memory. I'm so honoured to be a recipient of the Lifelong and Prosper Tribute pendant. For me, this is about the autism community and autistic people who have long connected with the Star Trek and Spock's legacy. When I first became an attorney, I hoped to help uplift voices that often go silenced, unheard, or ignored. Today, I hope to help continue uplifting my autistic community with justice, logic, empathy, curiosity, and education, and bringing a new perspective and outlook to the table. Advocacy is for everyone, and so is inclusion in greater society. Live long, and prosper. I hope to make Leonard proud, as well as my entire community. Remembering Leonard Nimoy. What's your thoughts?
I was a huge Star Trek fan. Late 70s, early 80s, used to go to loads of conventions. And I'm going to reference back to the Silberman book, Neurotribes. He said that people with autism like science fiction because they feel like aliens. They feel alien in the world. And that would be referencing identifying with Spock. But I always really wanted to be Captain Kirk. But and as I've said before, I like horror films, and I wonder if I like horror films because I find the world a generally horrific place to deal with. And someone at an autism group, when I said that, agreed with me. So there you go.
I remember when I was first discussing neurodivergence online with someone, and they used the phrase pathologizing the geek. That phrase came back to me. Not that I like that phrase, but it came back to me when I was talking with GR recently about the Silberman connection, but also reference to fandom as an aspect of the autistic neurodivergent experience, and how a lot of the online communities arose from those experiences of people who are sometimes termed as geeks or nerds or enthusiasts or special interest groups who associated with each other in these marginal areas, exploring new forms of art and culture and media, and using it to a certain extent to create identity, an identity to help survive through, harsh times. So, yeah, just a reflection there.
I remember when I was about maybe 18, I went to a Star Trek. I want to call it a film festival, but it couldn't be a film festival. It was just a festival in one of those independent theaters where they had people, probably the people she's talking about, who wrote or had some involvement with the show, and usually one actor come and speak, and then they'd tell you all about things and things you might not know, and then you'd watch some episodes of the TV series. And I remember when I looked around, I thought, oh, some of my people are here, even though I didn't know I was autistic. Because I remember there were a few people I knew, like my calculus teacher was there with her husband, and they just sort of acknowledge you, like, oh, I see you. Anyway, I that idea that you brought up, Ray, about pathologizing the geek, I felt like it was celebrating the geek. I don't know. You might have meant that, though. I also don't know what calculus is, but I got 81%.
When I went to work for the Job Centre in 2004, and the guy in charge of our section took us all over the pub on the first day, and he said, "What do you like?" And I said, "I like films and TV, especially Star Trek and Doctor Who." And he went, "Oh, well, you're a nerd," like really not in a nice way. And I think generally nerdism, geekism, whatever you want to call it, was actually looked down upon. And I think part of the way that's been that situation's not like that anymore is because of the Big Bang Theory.
Well, and there was an article in some major newspaper just yesterday about how much the world needs nerds now, I guess, because of, like, programming and web development and that sort of thing.
I remember reading an article and it said geek chic, and it's sort of it's very much an overground thing now, but I loved science fiction and horror from when I was in short trousers, and I still do. It's never left me.
It may be an autistic point I'm making here, but Star Trek nearly never made it. After the first series, I think they were going to pull it, or first couple of episodes. And then I was reflecting on, like, oh, what was the big thing we congregated around as a community in our youth? And it was the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, exactly. They play it. I have one of these independent theaters. I can see it from my front window. They have it all week long, or maybe for 2 weeks during the Halloween period. A really interactive thing. People, well, I'm sure you all have it too.
I think that Rocky as well has a very strong trans and LGBTQ thing about it. So I think there's just been a new film released about it as well.
Off topic, but at Easter they play Jesus Christ Superstar and have a sing-along.
I just bought some second-hand soundtrack albums, and one of them was Godspell. My mate asked, why are you getting that? And I went, well, I kind of like these turn of the 70s religious movie soundtracks, like Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell. But it's a strange old subject, that, yeah, identification. And Leonard Nimoy, who's quite a sinister character in Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah, he was also, going back to what I say, when I was first diagnosed, I remember saying to people, I always wanted to be Captain Kirk, but I ended up as Walter Bishop, who was a character in Fringe, and Nimoy was in that as a sort of, I think he was a bit of a villain in that too, one of his last appearances.
But the character of Spock is this mixture of logic and, the human side bursting through him in moments, the emotion, so you can see how people would associate there. I'm really intrigued by autism and being an attorney, though. An attorney, I often see these great professions as being such effort. How did people get there?
I wondered that too about this post, because everybody was encouraging me to become a lawyer, but I used to not understand it. I would think, no, not, I know I'm really logical, but I just couldn't be one. So I would imagine she's a human rights lawyer. Maybe if I knew that existed, I might have explored it more. I
I
hope
think
she
the
is.
reference in the post, Therese, is made to advocacy, yeah?
Yeah.
I think another thing with Spock is that, like you say, he was half human, half Vulcan, but he was hiding his human half. So you could say he was masking. And quick aside about autism and attorneys, I have to give a shameless plug here to the Korean show Extraordinary Attorney Woo, which is about an attorney with autism.
I love it, even though it's so exaggerated. I almost cried when I saw it at first. It's so delightful.
Spock could
Thanks.
also be blatantly direct, which is the inappropriate aspect of autistic community, as mentioned sometimes.
Thanks all. That was a great discussion, as always. Thanks for everyone that's posted and what we'll share tonight. It was very good topics and conversation and lengthy discussions, as always. So this is Harry's Facebook for Sunday the 26th of October 2025. I look forward to doing this next time. And now I'll hand over to Jules.
Thank you, Harry. And before we go to the second part of the show, remember that we have a sponsor, coldpack.co.uk. If you are a practitioner who requires cryotherapy solution for your clinic, Coldpack prints your details on the outside of the pack to remind your patients to come back to you. If you've been using a Coldpack for a while and you use coldpack.co.uk, everything you spend on the website comes here to support Autistic Association and Autistic Radio. Harry, what do you have for us today in the second part of the show?